Hello and welcome to the Husband Help Haven podcast, where you're going to learn how to be the best husband that you can be, no matter what your marriage is like right now. This is Stephen, and today we are going to talk about how good couples get divorced. This is a pattern that I've seen play out countless times. It probably plays a part in at least 50% of the men that I coach going through separation. And it's one of those things that I think whether you are separated or happily married right now, if you are a married man, you need to know about this pattern so that you can make sure that you stay a married man. And so let me tell you about, before we get into this lesson, I'm going to tell you pretty quick here what the pattern is. But first, I want to tell you about how I got the idea for this episode, and really not just this episode, but the next few episodes, because this is going to kick off a series about the lessons that I have learned over the past 10 years of coaching men through separation here at Husband Help Haven. And it all started about a year ago, actually, when I was at of all things, a wedding. And I was at this wedding by myself. It was out of town. It was my friend, sort of an acquaintance, but I like going to weddings when I can. And we didn't want to mess with getting childcare. So I was at this wedding by myself. And as happens when you're sort of the lone wolf at a wedding, you kind of get placed at the miscellaneous table during the reception. And that's what happened to me. So I'm sitting at this table with people that are kind of the odds and ends, the people that don't take, one or two people all sort of packed at a table, singles and doubles, that sort of a thing. And we're going around this table, kind of introducing ourselves, making some small talk because we're sitting there at this reception, we're killing time waiting for the bride and the groom to come out so we can eat. And we get to talking about, hey, so, what do you do? What's your profession? What do you do for work? What's your hobbies? Things like this. And I share that I coach men going through separation with a desire to save their marriage, of course. And the question was asked of me, so what's the secret? So what's the secret? What, if you had to tell the happy couple one thing, what would you tell them to make sure that they have a happy marriage? And here's what I told them. I'm going to tell you right now what I told them. I said, well, there is one way that I've seen happy couples get divorced time and time again. And that is you have a marriage on the back burner. Both spouses slowly become at their worst, and then an external crisis hits and you get to the point of divorce. Now that's the pattern. We're going to talk more about this pattern today. We're going to talk about why this is so dangerous, why it's so common, and what you can do about it, whether you're in separation or not separated. But first, I just want to set the scene a little bit, because after this episode, I have another lesson that I want to share too. In fact, I have quite a few lessons, things that I think that I've picked up that are worth sharing, that if you are a married man, it's worth you knowing these lessons. Making something of all these years and these countless men that I have coached going through separation. I think my count is up over to definitely over 100, maybe 150 plus men that I've professionally coached going through separation. Of course, if we count the men that I've been email coaching or, free coaching way back at the start of Husband Help Haven, that number goes up very, very high. But all that to say, I think I've got some lessons that are worth sharing, that are worth you knowing about. And so I want to share those over the next few episodes, the next few weeks, Lord willing, if things go well. So with that, let's talk a little bit more about today's lesson. How do good couples get divorced? And talking about this pattern. Marriage is on the back burner. It's three components, really. Marriage is on the back burner. Both spouses are at their worst. And then external crisis hits. Why is this so dangerous? Well, you can imagine, why this sets the stage for an otherwise good couple to get divorced, because when you have that external crisis hit in the circumstances of marriage being on the back burner and both spouses are not doing well, things are just, they're not at their best. They're kind of at their worst. Well, when that external crisis hits and the problems have been sort of too pervasive for too long, or you've had these sort of recurring dissatisfaction in the marriage for a long time, it's very easy in that state of mind to pin the problems on the marriage, to say, the marriage is dragging me down more than it's lifting me up. I need to get out. And of course, statistically, we know that women come to this conclusion a little more often than men. And so this is how good couples get divorced. And now I've given you, the answer. I've given you exactly what the pattern is right up front because I respect your time. But of course, as with all these lessons, there's a story behind it. And this story actually goes back to the early days of Husband Help Haven, almost 10 years ago. I remember the first time that this pattern really stuck out to me. And it was when I was speaking with a guy who we will call For today's episode, we will call Terry. Now, Terry was a great husband. He was a great husband, and his wife was a great wife. They were both very happy together. They had 3 kids. They had just finished a custom build of their dream home. They had a few acres of property, custom house. He had a good job. She got to stay at home work. She had a bit of a side hustle going for herself, but she had gotten to be the stay-at-home mom for their kids. Life on paper was very good. Was very good for them. And yet, late one September, almost 10 years ago now, Terry's wife sat him down and to him, completely out of the blue, told him, "I want out." And in short order, she moved out. She became contentious. It became a very difficult situation. And unfortunately, I don't think that they had a happy ending. They did not end up reconciling. Um, Now, what really stuck out to me about this story was just how shocked Terry was at his wife's decision to leave. He could not make sense of why she was leaving the relationship. And in fact, he was so befuddled, so flabbergasted by her decision. He actually, through the course of, and this is back when I was just doing email coaching. So I was just kind of offering my advice free of charge, take it or leave it, that sort of a thing for Terry. But we corresponded for a good 5-6 months back and forth on a near weekly basis. And he showed me pictures of his wife's letters to him. In fact, he had put all of the letters that his wife had written to him over the years into a little binder with little, sheet protectors, and it could be, as small down to like a little sticky note that just said, "Love you, have a good day," with a little heart on it from his wife, all the way up to like a torn out piece of notebook paper with a fully penned out letter. He had an anniversary card from April of that same year, where his wife was regaling him about how happy she is with their life, how happy she is in their marriage, how good of a husband Terry was. And he was showing me this almost like in protest, kind of crying out to the universe, like, why is this? How could this be happening? There's no way that if these things were true, if these things are in reality, these notes from so recently, how could I be here facing separation, facing divorce? It just doesn't make any sense. But I can tell you how it happened. And in fact, I've seen this exact same pattern play out across countless more marriages, unfortunately. And it may very well be that you're going to be able to identify some of how this pattern may have played a part in your own, if you're going through separation, marriage crisis. Because although Terry and his wife were both great people, a great couple, legitimately. I mean, they were just your picture perfect family, really and truly. He did admit through the course of our emails that the marriage had been on the back burner for a time, actually, for quite a while, actually measured in years, as he put it, about 3 years, actually. In fact, I had mentioned that they were living in like a custom dream home that they'd built themselves. Well, that didn't just appear out of nowhere. They obviously had, hired people to build this home for them. They contracted it out. And that whole process of building their home was a bit of a nightmare. It started as they had been told it was going to be about a year of building. It ended up being 2. They had set a budget that they thought they were going to be able to stay within. Very quickly, it became clear that budget was not going to suffice. And so about 6 months into the build, Terry started working overtime every week to fund the building, to fund the project, which meant his wife also had to step up at home, had to do more stuff. She felt pressure to make her side hustle bring in some cash as well. And what was supposed to be this sort of manageable and really an exciting project for the both of them to do together ended up taking a massive toll on their life and on their marriage. So although they stayed together through this whole process and really did see it through to completion, and they did move into it. Like I said, it was earlier actually that same year that they had moved into their dream home. Um, and he's thinking to himself this whole time, and he even told me that he like had this thought during this time. I know things are bad right now, but once we get this home done, once we get moved in, then we can start working on our marriage again and things will be good. So this is what he's thinking. So this is how he's okay with keeping the marriage on the back burner, even almost intentionally doing so. And he thought his wife was bought into this plan. And she may have been. She may have been bought into this plan, but something happened. Something happened that neither one of them saw coming. And it was really poor timing as well, which is that shortly after they moved into their dream home, his wife's father passed away very unexpectedly. And this really sent his wife into a tailspin from his account of things. She became very walled off. She did not deal with it very well. I mean, who does? You know, it's a hard thing. But this created, I should say, there appeared a distance in their relationship after her father passed away that never recovered. And she started to pull back over the summer, and it was by the end of that summer, like I said, in September, that she came out and said, I'm just done. I'm done. Now, you know, here at Husband Help Haven, I really am kind of a stickler, and for being charitable to the wife, I really do care about this. I'm going to say, you know, I'm not trying to portray Terry's wife as unreasonable. Nobody must stay in a marriage that they feel is damaging to their life or to their happiness. I understand we all take marriage vows, and that you know, you should stay in your marriage through sickness and in health, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, right? And yet, you know, us as men, especially, I think, tend to lean a little too heavily on these shoulds, and think that they're going to inform reality more than they actually do. And one way or another, Terry's wife became unhappy to the point, and I wasn't there, so I don't know. You know, I don't know the nature of their conflict specifically. I only know what I heard from Terry over email, right? So I wasn't privy to their conflicts with each other, anything like this. But this is what happened for them: is that his wife really became a different person after her father passed away, and all of that came in the context of their marriage was at the lowest it had ever been. And it had been there for a little bit. It had been there for a couple of years. So here we have the pattern, right? You can see this pattern now. It's very clear. This is exactly the pattern that happened with Terry. The marriage is on the back burner. Both spouses are at their worst, right? He's burnt out from working overtime all the time. She's burnt out from having to do a whole bunch of extra caregiving and other stuff around the home. And then this external crisis hits. Her father passes away. And just like that, it sparked what I would probably call an identity crisis. Probably fair to say that she went through an identity crisis or a midlife crisis. But this is just one example of what that external crisis could be. So let's just briefly talk about that part. You know, pretty self-explanatory. Marriage is on the back burner. We understand that part pretty well. Both spouses at their worst. We understand that part pretty well. We're going to talk about why this happens and why it's so dangerous in a moment. But let's talk about that third component, the external crisis hitting, and what that can be. Because in Terry's example, it was her father passing away. But really, I mean, there's like half a dozen, just easy off the top of your head, catalysts for an identity crisis. And any one of them could have been the thing, could have been that sort of match that lit the tinder that was their dried up, atrophied marriage relationship. Okay. It could have been turning an age that ends in 0 or 5. Or I had talking with a friend the other day who turned 33, you know, and just felt like he crossed that point from early 30s to mid 30s. And that was just sending him into a bad place. You know, he was not dealing with that very well. It could be, as it was for Terry's wife, the death of a parent. It could be financial hardship. It could be seeing your peers succeed It could be it could be kids leaving the home, empty nest, right? It could be, and this is something that I think not many people would think about, but in Terry's situation, it certainly applies, which is life became good on paper, right? Like they had moved into the dream home. They were there. Life should have been good, and yet she felt bad. She didn't feel happy in the marriage. She didn't feel happy in life. And yet it can't be their circumstances. It can't be their home. Their home is good. It can't be their kids are good. It must be the marriage, right? But it could also be this external crisis could have been, and I've certainly seen plenty of cases where it was, something a little more insidious, a little more sinister, which is temptation. You think that anybody succumbs to temptation? I shouldn't say this. I'm sure there are a small percentage of people, but very rarely will you see an affair start when the marriage is at the forefront and both spouses are at their best, right? Like the opposite of our sort of scenario here that we're talking about makes good couples get divorced. You're never going to see an affair start when your wife is feeling, like the marriage is just giving her everything that she wants and needs. She feels very prioritized in life, in your life, and she's doing well. Like she's managing her stuff well, and you're managing your stuff well. We're all doing well. Life is good. You don't see affairs start there. Where you do see affairs start is when the marriage has been starved, the marriage has dried up, there's no connection, there's no romance, there's no intimacy, and bad habits are running wild. And that's a nice segue actually for our next point that we're going to talk about. But real quick, the other external crisis that's worth mentioning is a bad influence. A bad influence or a bad idea coming from a bad influence. Now, you might think, oh, this is like toxic friends. People who are pro-divorce in her life that are sort of whispering or poisoning the well. And it could be that. I've seen that, certainly. Sort of your wife just becomes, she's around somebody, she sort of starts a new job or something like this, and her coworkers are divorced or single, and she just sort of becomes wrapped up in that. That becomes appealing to her because she's contrasting it with her marriage that's on the back burner, and her husband who's not doing so well, and herself who's not doing so well. And suddenly, this sort of life over here, single or divorced life, seems like a fantasy, right? But this could also come in the form of a book. It could come in the form of a TikToker, of an influencer, of something like this. Because the reality is, there is a whole industry out there for women, primarily, about why they should feel empowered to leave their marriage. Okay. Now, again, I'm not interested in getting into all that, and I know that there's nuance there. And again, I restate what I said earlier. Nobody's obligated to stay in a bad marriage. There's allowed to be limits. Okay. But at the same time, those bad influences, again, have a lot more sway when they come in the context of a back burner marriage and two spouses that are at their worst. They have the power to become a crisis, to instigate a crisis in that setting. So, okay, hopefully you understand, and maybe you can even see, if you're separated, maybe you can point back and see what that external crisis was in your relationship or in your life. But let's for a moment talk about what the takeaway should be from this. And I'm going to talk, we're going to talk about this. And then after this, we're going to talk about, like, if you're separated and this has happened for you, what should you do? We're also going to talk about if you're not separated, what should you do in the wake of this lesson? But first, let's talk about those first two components of this pattern, right? Marriage on the back burner, both spouses at their worst. Why is this so damaging? The reality is complacency will kill your marriage because only the good habits take effort. Only the good habits take intentionality. Your bad habits, they'll do just fine without any effort or any intentionality. It's like planting a garden. If you go out and if I go out here into my yard and I want to grow a nice flower bed, and I've attempted to do this before, and I do not have a green thumb, so I've learned this firsthand. If I go out and I try to plant a flower bed and I want to have a nice garden this summer, I have to be very intentional about that. If I want a garden bed full of flowers, I have to plan it, I have to maintain it, I have to do the work, and I have to show up and do it consistently, or I will not have a garden bed at the end of the summer, or if I do, it won't look good. On the other hand, if I want a garden bed full of weeds, guess how much work I have to do? Zero. Absolutely zero. In fact, I've got one out there right now. But this is how it is with habits too. If you want your bad habits to run wild, guess what? Do nothing. They'll run wild. They'll grow. If you want to have good habits in your life, if you want to be a good husband, that takes intentionality. It takes willpower. It takes planning. It takes action. Inaction, you can have all the bad habits you want. They will do just fine. Action for good habits. You have to have it. So when we look at Terry, and again, he admitted this. Like I'm making it out to be, earlier I was sort of making it out as like Terry just really couldn't wrap his mind around. He was a humble man. He was able to admit where his flaws were, and he admitted that he did not prioritize the marriage relationship, that he became apathetic, that he didn't connect with his wife, nor did he seek connection with his wife the way that he should have during those years that they were working on the house. And additionally, he didn't pivot very well. He didn't adapt. When the project was taking longer than he planned, he didn't sort of say to himself, oh man, I don't know if my marriage can take it. I don't know if I even want to push it through, even if it could take it. And so because of that, even though Terry didn't have any serious crazy issues, he didn't have any serious problems, and neither did his wife. They were both good people, good spouses, a good husband and a good wife, and yet they got beat down by life. They didn't take the steps to build themselves up. And then the next external crisis hit and threw them out. So, okay, if you are listening to this and you are not separated, which I'm not exactly sure what percentage of that, what percentage of you that fits, but let's just say that you're not separated. You view yourself as that guy who has a good marriage. You're married to a good wife. Great. Awesome. Here's my advice for you. Never assume your wife is okay with putting the marriage on the back burner. Never assume that. Because even if she agrees to this, the thing is, here's what's going to happen. First off, when the marriage is on the back burner, it's going to atrophy. It's not going to just maintain. It's going to get worse. You're going to get worse as a husband. You will not be pouring in that. You will be that garden bed of weeds. And additionally, these things just never work out because that little season of the marriage being on the back burner always turns into more. Always becomes more than you thought it would be. And so you need to recognize that no matter how good your marriage is, if you don't nourish it, a malnourished marriage will die. Love is the water. And if you're not watering your marriage, if you're not watering your garden, it's going to dry up and it's not going to look so good. Or what may happen is that your wife will adapt to the low amount of water available in your marriage, the low amount of love. And guess what she might turn into? A cactus. Something that can make do with very little water. They can make do with very little love and still get by. So if you feel like your wife is a bit like a cactus, there could be an upstream reason why that is. Maybe we're not pouring in enough love. So to sum up, here's why you should never put the marriage on the back burner. These seasons are never as unique as you tell yourself they are. They're never as short as you tell yourself they are. And they're always more costly than you tell yourself they will be. So do not put your marriage on the back burner. Don't let yourself put your marriage on the back burner. And if life just throws you a curveball and you really do just have no choice, then what you ought to do, what Terry perhaps could have or should have done, is stay somewhat active. You got to keep some amount of proactivity in your relationship. You have to protect some intimacy, some affection, some courtship, some amount of intentionality. You need to get in there and do something. And you also need to do two other things, which is remind your wife that this is a season, that this is a time. You need to be saying to her, listen, I love you. I care about you. Please, remember, we're on the same page here. Don't take these present difficulties as a proof of what our marriage really is like. Don't let this become sort of what you believe about our marriage. This is not the norm. This is not the status quo. It is a season. We're getting through it together, and we're doing a good job. So you do that. You're sort of staying in tune with the seasonality of this sort of back burner phase, but also really make a habit of acknowledging your wife's sacrifices. Again, for Terry, if he had perhaps done a better job of saying, wife, I know how hard this is for you. Wow, you are doing such a good job keeping up with the kids. Thank you so much for enabling me to be working overtime. I know that this is a costly thing for you to do for us, but here's why it's worth it. We are going to get this house built. I know it's taking longer than I thought. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm going for here? We're sort of keeping her built up, even as the marriage just doesn't have as much bandwidth allocated to it as it probably deserves, okay? So if you're not separated, please take those lessons to heart. If you are separated, if you're in a marriage crisis right now and you look back and you say like, crap, that was me, I did that. Here's what I hope you can take away from this episode. Here's what I hope this does for you. First off, I hope that it deepens your empathy for how your wife got here. A lot of times these men that have had this pattern play out in their relationships, there's some difficulty in really accepting their part in the breakdown of the marriage. A lot of times these guys will come to me and struggle with the fairness of it all. Sort of the, how could this be? And that's kind of the common refrain, just as it was for Terry. I hope that after hearing this episode, you understand that there were things happening behind the scenes while the marriage was on the back burner that are worth taking ownership of. Like I said, remember that analogy of the garden. If you were not tending the garden, weeds were growing. If you were not tending to yourself, ensuring you were a good husband, a good father, a good partner, then you were becoming a worse partner. Your insecurities, your weaknesses, and your bad habits were growing as you're sort of viewing yourself as holding still. So I hope that this deepens your empathy for how your wife got here. I hope that you can sort of find ways to recognize and speak into or perhaps validate her emotional starvation if she's saying that that's what she felt. Maybe you became more of a cactus than you realized. We talked about maybe your wife turns into a cactus. Maybe you became more of a cactus than you realized. Again, I'm sure Terry, this is both spouses at their worst, right? Terry was not at his best as a husband. I'm sure he was not his kindest or his most loving or his most affectionate, his most sort of compassionate, none of those things, not during those couple years that they were struggling, that they were trying to get this house built. I also hope that it will, on the flip side, both that it will deepen your compassion and also that it will lessen your compulsion to argue with her about how this could be happening. Again, hopefully this is kind of like Separation 101. If you've been around Husband Help Haven at all, you know that we're not in the business of convincing a wife to change her mind or convincing a wife to come back to the marriage. But all the same, I know it's hard to resist those compulsions, especially when you feel as Terry felt, like, how could this be? So I hope perhaps if you hear this, you can sort of resist that urge. We don't need to argue with her and try and tell her how good the marriage was. We don't need to try and argue and tell her how little your flaws were or how good of a husband that you were or how close you guys are to a good marriage. Because instead, I'm hoping that you'll be able to just own it, to be able to say, you're right. I did allow the marriage to be on the back burner. I did let our relationship atrophy. I let myself sort of become worse than I wanted to be. And I understand why that became untenable for you. I understand that. And if she says, why did it take me leaving for you to change? I hope that after hearing this episode, you're able to respond with something more like, you're right. I was entrenched in complacency. I took you for granted. And I'm so sorry that I made you feel like your only option was to force change by leaving. You have every right to look out for yourself when you feel like I can't or won't. And I'll also say, I have woken up. I do see what I did, and I am going to change, but I know that words really have lost a lot of their meaning at this point because you have months or years or whatever of evidence to the contrary. So now listen, guys, I am going to put that exact little message there just for your reference. I'm going to put this on the episode page, which, by the way, husbandhelphaven.com/episode dash 25, episode 25 with a dash between them. That's going to be the where you can get the details, references, stuff like that for this episode. The final thing I'll leave you with is to ponder this question. What is the best way to show your wife that she's in your top priorities when she doesn't want the marriage to be in your top priorities? You know, because this is the conundrum. This is what you're dealing with. If you are separated after this pattern has sort of played out in your relationship, you're at a place where you recognize the marriage was deprioritized for too long, leading to separation. Now your wife doesn't want the marriage in your top priorities. For most guys in separation, this is true. She doesn't want that for you. She wants you to just accept the separation and accept the divorce. And yet, the only way that you're going to change that is if she sees that the marriage can be in your priorities in a way that enriches her life and brings her freedom and happiness. So that's the catch-22. I want you to think about that. I'm not going to, the specific answer is going to be different for every man, but that's sort of that's the question to ponder if this is you. How do I show her that she's in my top priorities when she doesn't want the marriage to be in my top priorities? How do I do that? Now, the other thing I'll do as I'm wrapping up this episode is leave you with some encouragement. Because the good news is this is a common issue. And I promise you that reconciling after hitting this point, even if it leads to separation, is possible. Your wife going from absolutely dead set on divorce because she just can't believe that change is possible to believing and loving the man that you show her in the marriage, this is possible. It can happen. It does happen. I've seen it happen. Okay. We do have resources on Husband Help Haven to help you do that. But I just want to leave you with that encouragement that, we spent a lot of time talking about the problem today. I want you to know there is a solution. This is not the end just because this problem has happened in your marriage. It's not the end. You have to focus on what you can control. And again, this isn't the episode to talk about what all that is. But I just want you to know that it's not hopeless, even if this pattern has hit your marriage. And the final thing I'll say is that if you happen to be a wife who is listening to this, and I don't suspect that there are a ton of wives who are listening, but if there are, what I'd say to you is, I understand why you want to leave. And I do want you to seize your dignity and, if necessary, your safety, both emotional and physical. I acknowledge that boundaries are part of a healthy existence, but I also want to say this. If you've been told that he can't change, or if you've told yourself that he can't change, I want to tell you he can. I promise you he can. Change is possible. People can change. All people can change. That goes for the wife and that goes for the husband. I am a big believer in people's ability to change, to improve, to get better. So, on that note, we will continue this series next time talking about another major lesson that I've learned from my years coaching men through separation. Next time, we're going to talk about how to, let's see, what's the best way to put this? We're going to talk about how to attack your marital blind spots. All right? Think about that. How to attack your marital blind spots, how to get yourself to see them when they're blind spots. How do we do that? We're going to talk about that next time, and I'm going to give you some tips that I hope will help you to, again, just be the best husband that you can be, no matter what your marriage is like right now. So guys, I hope that you enjoyed this lesson, this episode being back. We will have another episode next week. If you do want to review anything that we talked about, head on over to husbandhelphaven.com/episode 25 for the show notes. That's episode dash the numbers 25. And that will walk you through what we talked about today with a sort of bullet point rundown and stuff like that. So nothing to pitch you guys today. No sponsorship, nothing like that. Just I hope this is valuable. Like I said, I've seen this pattern play out so many times. I just have to put it out there into the world. I hope that this makes a difference in somebody's marriage, that this can head off this pattern from playing out in somebody's marriage. So spread this around, guys, just keep this in the back of your mind. I'm not saying spread the podcast around. I'm saying spread the lesson around. If you see people that are falling into this, if you see a fellow friend or brother or whatever who's falling into this, tell them, don't put the marriage on the back burner. Be more proactive. Don't let yourself atrophy as a person, not just physically, mentally, and emotionally. Stay proactive. Tend your garden. And if we do this, there will be more marital joy and less divorce in the world. I am very confident of that. So with that, guys, thank you so much for listening. It has been Stephen here on the Husband Help Haven podcast, coming to you with much manly love. We'll be back next week. Thanks for listening.